A heart's hidden scar. Sarah didn't lose her brother in an accident. She lost him in a sentence. The last thing he ever said to her wasn't goodbye. It was an accusation. Sharp, deliberate, meant to wound. And it did. For years afterwards, those words lived inside her like a splinter she couldn't quite reach, changing how she moved through her days, what she allowed herself to feel, even the way she slept. This is a story about what happens when hurt turns into something harder, and what it takes to set it down. We've always been fascinated by how our bodies heal. Take a simple bump against a table corner or the edge of a bed. That sharp sting that makes you catch your breath, and then the bruise that blooms, first red, then purple, fading slowly over days or weeks. It aches when you touch it, a reminder of that careless moment. And if you happen to bump the same spot again, the pain is sharper, the bruise deeper, more vivid. Do it enough times, and it could turn into something far more serious. Perhaps a wound that never fully heals. But what about the bruises we carry in our hearts? Those emotional knocks that leave no mark on the skin, yet we feel them every day. That's what happened to Sarah, and her story offers something useful for anyone carrying an old hurt. Not a formula, but a path. Sarah was in her mid-40s, a teacher at a small primary school. She had always been the reliable one, the neighbour who remembered birthdays, the friend who showed up when others didn't. There was a steadiness to her that people noticed. She baked for the school fete. She organised the nativity play. She walked her dog in the early mornings, whatever the weather. But beneath that cheerful exterior, she carried a weight that had been growing for years. It all started with her brother, Michael. They had been close as children, sharing secrets in the quiet of an old farmhouse, building dens in the garden, arguing over silly things and making up within the hour. There's a particular kind of comfort in a sibling who has known you your whole life. They remember the child you were before the world taught you to edit yourself. But as adults, life pulled them in different directions. Michael moved to the city, chasing opportunities and new horizons. Sarah stayed closer to home, building her life around the familiar, her teaching, her parents, the rhythms of the countryside. Then came the losses that changed everything. Their parents passed away within months of each other. First their father, suddenly, a heart attack that gave no warning. Then their mother, more slowly, to an illness that wore her down. Sarah had been the one who stayed. She cooked the meals, sat by the bedside, learned the names of the nurses, managed the appointments. It wasn't a sacrifice in her mind. It was simply what you do for the people who raised you. Michael visited when he could. He sent flowers. He called. But the distance, both physical and emotional, was real. After the second funeral, the will was read. It was straightforward. The family home and most of the estate went to Sarah. She had, after all, been the one caring for their parents in those final years. Michael received a smaller inheritance, not nothing, but less. And that's when the fracture happened. Michael felt cheated. He didn't say it right away. It built up over weeks, then came out in a single conversation that turned into an argument, then into something worse. He accused Sarah of manipulating their parents, of being greedy, of playing the dutiful daughter to secure the house. The words were harsh, the kind you can't easily take back. Sarah tried to explain, tried to remind him of the months she'd spent at their mother's bedside, the nights she hadn't slept. But he wasn't listening. He stormed out, and the last thing he said was this: "You always knew how to make yourself look good. I hope it was worth it." Then he was gone. No calls, No messages, just silence. At first, Sarah told herself it would pass. "He's grieving," she said to the empty kitchen. "He's hurt. He'll come round." But weeks turned into months, and Michael didn't call. She would see photos of him sometimes, smiling at a party, on holiday with new friends, living his life as if she didn't exist. And each time, something tightened in her chest. The resentment began as a small knot, a bruise that throbbed whenever she thought of him. "How could he say those things?" she'd mutter while washing up or walking the dog. "After everything I did for Mum and Dad?" Like that first bruise on your shin, it started superficial, a sting, an ache. Something you notice but assume will fade. But resentment doesn't stay that way. It has a way of growing in the dark. Sarah found herself replaying the argument in her head. Not once, but dozens of times. She'd be driving to school and suddenly hear his voice again. She'd be trying to read a book and realize she'd been staring at the same page for 10 minutes, the old words looping in her mind. "He took advantage of my kindness," she'd think. "He was always the selfish one." The bruise deepened. Her thoughts turned bitter. She stopped enjoying her walks. Her garden, once a source of pride, became another task she couldn't face. She lay awake at night, the old hurt swirling like a storm she couldn't quiet. And just like bumping that same spot repeatedly, the resentment made things worse. Her health began to suffer, not in dramatic ways, but in quiet ones. Headaches became frequent. Her appetite faded. She snapped at her students over small things, something she'd never done before. Friends noticed the change. "You're not yourself lately," they'd say gently. "Just tired," she'd reply, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But deep down, she knew it wasn't tiredness. It was something heavier. The bitterness was eating away at her joy, stealing the color from her days. There's a phrase sometimes used about resentment. It's like drinking poison and hoping the other person suffers. Sarah had heard something similar once, years ago, from an older friend who had lost her own sister to a misunderstanding. "It only hurts you," the friend had said. "The other person isn't even thinking about it." At the time, Sarah had nodded politely. Now, the words came back with a different weight. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, Sarah drove out to the old family home. It stood empty now, waiting for her to decide what to do with it. She walked through the rooms slowly, running her hand along the familiar walls. Memories flooded back, childhood laughter echoing in the hallway, the smell of her mother's cooking, the sound of her father's voice reading by the fire. But with those memories came the pain, the silence where there should have been a brother's visit, the empty chair at the table. She sat at the worn kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. "Why, Michael?" she whispered. "Why did you have to ruin everything?" In that moment of raw vulnerability, something shifted. She realized she had been carrying this bruise for too long, letting it turn into a wound that was poisoning her spirit. She had been waiting for an apology that might never come, waiting for him to see reason, waiting for fairness. And in all that waiting, she was the one losing ground. But how to let it go? Forgiveness felt impossible. Michael hadn't apologized. He hadn't reached out. He hadn't admitted he was wrong. How do you forgive someone who hasn't asked for it? She sat with that question for a long time. Then she remembered something, not a sermon or a lecture, but a simple teaching she'd heard since childhood. It spoke of mercy, not as weakness, but as strength. It said that forgiving doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means releasing what it's doing to you. There was a line she'd always remembered. Blessed are the merciful. And another. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Not as a transaction, but as a way of living, a path that kept your own heart from hardening. Sarah realized that mercy wasn't about forgetting the hurt or pretending it didn't matter. It was about choosing not to let the bruise define her. It was about setting down a weight she had carried for too long, whether or not the other person ever picked it up. That evening, she made a decision. She would write to Michael. Not a defense, not an accusation. Just a letter, honest, simple, from the heart. She sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, and she wrote, "Michael, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't even know if you want to hear from me. But I need to say what I should have said a long time ago. I'm not writing to argue about the will or who did what. I'm writing because I miss my brother. I miss the way we used to talk. I miss knowing you're out there somewhere, even if we're not close. What you said that day hurt me more than I can explain. But I've realized something. Holding on to that hurt has only made my life smaller. And I don't want a small life. I don't want to carry this anymore. I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I need to be free of it. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If you don't, I understand. But I wanted you to know that the door isn't locked. Your sister, Sarah." She read it through twice. Then she posted it the next morning, not knowing what would come of it. Weeks passed. Sarah focused on what she could control. She spoke to a trusted friend about what she'd been carrying. Not a formal process, just an honest conversation with someone who wouldn't judge. She started walking again, noticing the changing colors of the trees. She began volunteering a few hours a week at a local charity that helped families in conflict. Something that gave her a sense of purpose beyond her own story. The bruise began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. She felt lighter, more present. The old loops of resentment still appeared sometimes, but they didn't have the same grip. She had practiced, in small ways, the art of letting go. Then, one rainy afternoon, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number at first. Then she heard the voice, hesitant, quieter than she remembered. "Sarah, it's Michael." There was a long pause. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel the weight of what it cost him to make this call. "I got your letter," he said. "I've read it, more than once." Another pause. "I was wrong." His voice cracked slightly. "I was angry and grieving, and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that. None of it was true. I'm sorry." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she hadn't realized was still there. "I already forgave you," she said softly. "Let's start fresh." Their reconciliation wasn't perfect. Old habits die hard. There were awkward moments, careful conversations, times when the old hurt flickered back to life. But it was real. They were trying. And that trying, that willingness to begin again, was worth more than any perfect resolution. Sarah learned something through all of this. Resentment, like a physical bruise, can be treated if caught early. But if left to fester, it turns into something that steals your peace and narrows your life. By choosing mercy, by forgiving without being asked, she not only healed her own heart, but opened the door to rebuilding something she thought was lost forever. So if you're carrying a bruise in your heart today, from a betrayal, a misunderstanding, or an old wound that never quite healed, here are 2 small things worth trying. First, notice what you're carrying. Give it a name. Say to yourself, I'm not just annoyed, I'm hurt. There's power in honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Second, ask yourself, what would it feel like to set this down? Not to forget it, not to excuse it, but to stop letting it shape your days. You might write a letter you never send. You might speak to someone you trust. You might simply decide in a quiet moment that you've carried it long enough. Forgiveness isn't a favor you do for someone else. It's a kindness you offer yourself. And that's a healing worth every effort. Take care of your heart, my friends. It's the only one you've got. If this story spoke to you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet tales of courage, healing, and everyday wisdom, subscribe to the channel and press the bell. New videos every week. Until next time, take care of your heart and of each other.